testing, testing. Okay, good.
Testing, testing.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. So today we are broadcasting live from the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. Welcome to our Know Your Records program. My name's Andrea Bassing-Matney. I'm so glad that you're here with us either on site or online on YouTube. Before we begin, I would like to give you some instructions on how to participate in today's program. For those of you who have joined us on site, again, welcome. We will take your questions. We ask that you hold on to them until the very end of their presentation. And if you can, please use these microphones in the aisles so we can capture your voice online. So for those of you who are watching online, you too can ask questions. We'll need you to log into the chat feature of this YouTube channel and type your questions in. I will then ask the presenters your questions, again, at the end of their session. You'll also find two hot links. One will take you to their presentation slides and the other to our live captioning. Pardon me. So today's program is entitled World War II and the First Motion Picture Unit Films with preservation specialists Audrey Amadon and Heidi Holmstrom. They work in the National Archives and Records Administration Motion Picture Preservation Lab. They perform conservation and preservation work on motion picture, pardon me, I'm going to catch this up. Here we go. Preservation work on motion picture records held at the National Archives. Before joining the lab in 2006, Audrey worked with the Donald B. McMillan Film Collection at the Perry McMillan Arctic Museum in Bowdoin College. Heidi completed her archival education at Western Washington University, earning a master's in history with a certificate in archives and records management. She has worked in the lab since 2009. It's a pleasure to have them return to highlight their work. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our presenters, Audrey Amadon and Heidi Holmstrom.
Hi, thank you. So today, Heidi and I will be sharing with you some films of the Army Air Force's First Motion Picture Unit. The First Motion Picture Unit made hundreds of films during World War II, and we're only touching on a handful today. But our goal is to provide an introduction to a group of fascinating films to explain why making them was important to the war effort and to whet your appetite for more. Everything you see today will be available on the National Archives YouTube channel and in our catalog, so you can go find the complete films later. Just first, a word about us. Andrea did go right quickly. We work in the Motion Picture Preservation Lab. We provide film preservation and duplication services to all parts of the National Archives. That means that we assess films for deterioration, we make new copies, new film copies if necessary, and we digitize for access. If you want to know more about what we do, I encourage you to check out the short video that we made a few years back. It's called Out of the Dark, and it is available right on the main page of our YouTube channel. On to the main program. How did we end up with the First Motion Picture Unit? After the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the United States entry into World War II, there was an urgent need to train millions of men for military service very quickly. During World War I, film education had proven to be an effective and efficient method of teaching men to fight and could also be used for recruitment and morale purposes. As a result, when the United States ramped up the production of munitions and aircraft, the military turned to films to teach men how to use them. In order to meet demand, in March of 1942, the commander of the Army Air Forces, General Hap Arnold, devised a plan with Jack Warner of Warner Brothers Studios to create a separate filmmaking unit for the Army Air Forces. So remember, at the time, at the start of the war, the Air Force was only a branch of the Army, and so therefore it depended on the Army Signal Corps for all of its filmmaking needs. General Arnold believed that the Army Air Forces needed their own filmmaking unit in order to accommodate the specific needs of the branch and to promote itself as a distinct unit. So the idea of the First Motion Picture Unit was born. Over 3 years, the First Motion Picture Unit would produce several hundred films and recruited members from the ranks of Hollywood studios, most notably stars such as Ronald Reagan, Bill Holden, and Clark Gable, whose films you'll be seeing today. While the First Motion Picture Unit was being stood up, the Army Air Forces contracted with Warner Brothers to make several films to serve their immediate needs. At the top of the list was Winning Your Wings, a recruitment film for the general public that would fill 100,000 open slots and recruit airmen to fly the tens of thousands of planes that were rolling off assembly lines. Lieutenant James Stewart, you probably all recognize him, was the perfect actor to star in the short film. Stewart was a licensed pilot and had enlisted in the Army Air Corps in early 1941. The lanky actor was rejected for being underweight, but is said to have eaten spaghetti every day in order to make weight and serve his country. Stewart enlisted as a private and made full colonel by the end of the war. During his first years of service, Stewart struggled to be assigned to combat duty. He was understandably peeved when he received orders to make Winning Your Wings. But after writer Owen Crump explained the film's importance to him, Stewart quickly got on board. Winning Your Wings was so successful that it resulted in 150,000 new recruits. Our first clip today is from the opening of Winning Your Wings, where we see Lieutenant James Stewart in all of his folksy glory.
Like I'm back in the movies again, doesn't it? Well, as a matter of fact, I like to do some talking. Don't go away until I get this thing off. Now, it isn't as if it was a chore for me to talk to you because I want to speak on my favorite subject, the Army Air Forces. I can't speak from long experience. I've only been in the service a year, but I've learned a lot about what the Air Forces have to offer. That's what I want to talk to you about. Right now, the greatest mass mobilization in the history of the world is taking place. Men from cities, towns, farms, married men and single men, brothers, sweethearts, husbands, fathers and sons, businessmen and workers from the factories, and students from colleges and high schools all over America. They're mobilizing, joining up, or having their numbers pulled out of a fishbowl. And this war we're fighting today and tomorrow and the next day until we win is a war of the air. The whole world knows that. Our factories know that. So interceptors, pursuit ships, light bombers, medium bombers, and flying fortresses are rolling out of those factories. 65,000 fighting planes this year, 100,000 fighting planes next year. And to keep them flying, 2 million men. Now that's where you come in. The Army Air Forces need 15,000 captains, 40,000 lieutenants, 35,000 flying sergeants. Well, how about it?
Sorry. Excuse me. So another of the Warner Brothers recruitment films made during the months before the first motion picture unit was activated, The Rear Gunner was not released until 1943. The film starred Burgess Meredith, who you see up in the upper right-hand corner. You might know him better as the Penguin from the Batman series, the 1960s, or Mickey in the Rocky series through the 1980s. But he was actually a prolific actor. He was a theater actor. He had already been in a prominent role in an adaptation of Mice and Men at this time. And of course, Ronald Reagan down in the bottom right-hand corner. The film emphasizes that everyone has a role to play and follows Meredith's character as he learns that his small stature is actually ideal for his position as a rear gunner. Many of those who worked on the rear gunner ended up with significant positions in the first motion picture unit. Ronald Reagan quite famously served as the first motion picture unit's chief personnel officer. In July of 1942, The first motion picture unit began production at the old Vitagraph Studios in Hollywood, which was owned by Warner Brothers. The unit was mostly staffed by Hollywood veterans, writers, producers, technicians, and actors. As you can see in this still, the unit operated like any Hollywood studio with one notable difference. All of its members were in uniform. The first home of the unit turned out to be a bit too run down for their purposes, so in September they moved to Hal Roach Studios. Hal Roach had joined the Army Signal Corps, leaving his studio idle and available for the Army Air Forces to lease. Roach was a legendary comedy producer of the silent era and was responsible for the Our Gang series and numerous Laurel and Hardy comedies. So by March of 1943, the first motion picture unit released their first film that was made entirely by the unit, Learn and Live, which showed pilots examining their mistakes in the afterlife. And this is kind of important, too, that we aren't going into too much today, but in addition to the slick training and recruitment films, the first motion picture unit was also responsible for training and overseeing combat camera units for the Army Air Forces. Footage that was shot by the combat cameramen was incorporated into the unit's films and also used for intelligence purposes. So they had a very important job, and they were on the front lines. This next extended clip is from a film that the first motion picture unit made about itself. The complete film is 20 minutes and can be found on our YouTube channel. We'll be showing you about 6 minutes today. Shoot, sorry.
Well, the big day finally.
Sorry.
This is the Army Air Force's first motion picture unit in Culver City, California. Here are produced training, operational, and inspirational films. Films which graphically illustrate what we're fighting for, what we're fighting against, and what we're fighting with. Today, the Army Air Forces faces a tremendous task, the task of training men by the millions to man and maintain the air armadas it's hurling in ever-increasing numbers against the enemy, to instruct the maximum number of men in the minimum amount of time, and to inspire as well as to instruct them. The Army Air Forces has adopted many novel educational methods, has activated many specialized organizations such as this. Mainly from the motion picture industry come the men of the first motion picture unit. They are men of all crafts, writers, directors, cutters, electricians, cameramen, sound recorders. Men who've been carefully chosen from among the most proficient film technicians available. Men who've had long years of training and experience in the art and science of the motion picture. And while these men are making movies for the Army is making soldiers out of them. They're specialists, yes, but first and foremost, they're soldiers. So they've got to do their job the Army way. They've got to be strictly GI. From directive to finished film, the course of an Air Force motion picture project is charted and checked by the production office. Here the shooting script is broken down, converted into terms of money and minutes, men and materials. It is the production office which coordinates and expedites the operations of the many different departments that make up the first motion picture unit. Of all the weapons of World War II, none has proved more effective than words. And words are particularly potent when used by the Army motion picture writer. For his medium is a young and vital and compelling force, one whose possibilities for visual education are endless, still virtually unexplored. These soldier writers of the first motion picture unit work in close contact with technical collaborating agencies, secure authentic, on-the-scene information at air bases and training centers throughout the country. These massive structures are the sound stages of the first motion picture unit, especially designed and constructed for motion picture purposes, soundproofed and air-conditioned. Their aggregate floor space covers an area of 78,000 square feet. On a single one of these stages, measuring 236 feet long, 148 feet wide, and 60 feet high, as many as 4 separate production units can operate simultaneously. And here in one section of Stage 5, filming is about to begin on Training Film Project number 226, Instrument Flight. Technicians give their equipment a final check, and the director calls.
All right, quiet, please. Here we go.
All right, roll 'em.
Quiet.
Oh, look up there, Red.
The art department is an excellent example of how the arts of peace are turned to the arts of war. These Army artists and architects translate the printed pages of a training film script into practical terms of detailed sketches and architectural floor plans and blueprints. Often they make up miniature models of sets, built to scale and exact replicas in every respect. Here's a model of the set you saw on Stage 5, an operations base in North Africa. This precise pre-production planning in the art department saves precious man-hours and materials, enables the first motion picture unit to turn out training films that are economical as well as effective. And here's another model, a squadron headquarters somewhere in the South Pacific, one of the sets in project number 1024, recognition of the Japanese Zero fighter.
Lieutenant Saunders reporting for duty, sir.
Glad to have you with us, Lieutenant.
Glad to be here, Major.
We can certainly use you. Sit down. Cigarette?
Oh, thank you, sir.
How was the flight over?
Well, I made it, sir, with the help of a P-40.
You like our P-40s?
Oh, yes, sir. It's a nice airplane.
Good. Then maybe we can count on you not to shoot any of them down.
Well, I didn't have any plans along that line, sir.
It's been done, you know.
You mean jet pilots?
I mean American pilots. Men with as much enthusiasm for the P-40 as you have, but with an unfortunate lack of ability to tell a friend from an enemy.
Here, members of a bomber crew are being made up for crash scenes in training film project number 1010, emergency care of air crew casualties. First, the makeup expert applies a foundation of heavy grease paint. Then, with liquid latex, collodion, and other chemicals, and a few deft strokes of his blending brush, he makes them look like this on the screen. Not many months ago, these serious soldier artists were the merry men whose pens put life and laughter into Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and Barney Bear. Today, they've turned their talents to technical things, things like thrust and torque, the trajectory of a bomb, the inner workings of intricate flight instruments, things which the student airman must know and which the animated sequence in a training film can best help to teach him. Complex operations or minute mechanical details that the camera cannot capture in actuality are graphically and authentically illustrated in the drawings of these artists. Long famed for his resourcefulness and ingenuity has been the motion picture property man. No matter how unusual may be the article or prop needed for a film, the property man has got it in stock or knows where to get it or how to make it. His department, a combination warehouse and museum, houses thousands of odd and assorted objects. At a moment's notice, he can provide a B-4 bag or a boomerang, a B-26 pedestal or a bunch of bananas.
In the clip you just watched, you heard the types of films produced by the First Motion Picture Unit described as instructional, operational, and inspirational. But above everything, the films were practical, addressing specific needs of the Army Air Forces. One urgent problem in the Pacific Theater was some pilots' failure to tell the difference between the Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 and the US Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, leading to incidents of friendly fire. The solution was recognition of the Japanese Zero fighter. The film starred a recently captured Zero fighter, as well as Lieutenant Ronald Reagan. And you already saw a short clip in the First Motion Picture Unit film excerpt, but the real utility of the film comes from animated sequences pinpointing the differences between the P-40 and the Zero, which I've highlighted in some of the stills on screen. These straight educational sequences are accompanied by a dramatic story showing Reagan's character, Lieutenant Saunders, who really thinks he knows his stuff, making an all too common mistake.
Well, the big day finally came. Saunders was on his own, out Jap hunting. Looked sort of keyed up. Wouldn't you be? Don't expect too much, Lieutenant, not on your first day. What's up, see something? It's a plane, all right. But what sort of a plane? Friend or enemy? P-40 or Zero? Well, now's the time to remember your recognition. Now, as it a deep radiator, round tail curving in toward nose, inline engine, then it's a P-40. Or has that plane an oil cooler and air scoop, pointed tail curving out away from nose, radial engine? If it has, then it's a 0. Tough to tell from here. Maybe if you got closer. Start climbing, Saunders. Take another look. Hold it, Saunders. Make sure. That's a P-40. The lucky thing you missed. Wouldn't want that on your conscience. Look, it's coming back. Like to take another shot at it? Okay, we won't rub it in. Oh, you've got it coming to you, not waiting to get your recognition.
Wish I could apologize from here.
In the end, Saunders vindicates himself, following the identification checklist laid out by the film and downing a 0. And the copy that we scanned for that is the copy that comes from the Ronald Reagan Library. Another famous face in the first motion picture unit was Clark Gable, who joined the military to honor his late wife, Carol Lombard, who had recently died in a plane crash during a trip to sell war bonds. After completing the Air Force's rigorous officers candidate school, Gable received command of a 6-person motion picture unit accompanying the 351st Bomb Group to England. He flew 5 combat missions over Germany, earning the Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross. Gable returned to Hollywood to edit the film shot overseas, and the footage was used in a number of first motion picture unit films, most notably Combat America, produced by Gable. And he was also called upon to narrate a film aimed at recruiting men to become officers in the Army Air Forces, titled Wings Up.
One flying fortress, late of Seattle, now visiting in the Pacific. Pretty, isn't it? It's been flying for 3,000 miles. Unfortunately, it's lost. It's this man's fault. His nerve is gone. Everything he's been taught has left him. The pity is that they got through to their objective. Had to fight off half a dozen planes besides. And now, they're lost on the way back. 1 weak link will snap the strongest chain. Too bad. For our side. That plane was worth $350,000. I don't know what amount you'd quote on the men. How much would you take for your life? Why did this man get this job? Isn't there an X-ray machine that can look into a man and say, he'll do? Yes, there is such an X-ray machine, and it looks into men's minds, hearts, and soul, and it finds them either adequate or wanting. It's called the Officers Candidate School of the Army Air Forces, and it's situated at Miami Beach, Florida. Sustineo Alas stands for I sustain the wings. In the hands of these men and their minds and their discipline lies the hope that we will always keep them flying. How does the school test these men? How does it expose those that must not lead and teach those that can to lead? Where and how do we get those men? That's important enough to know.
Wings Up provides an overview of a program explicitly designed to weed out those who couldn't perform under the pressure of combat. In the next clip, we can see a little of what the recruits were subjected to.
Still the same day they're being processed. Give your name. How old is your mother? When'd you faint last? Look out, mister. Here it comes. Oh! You a real estate agent, mister? You're looking around as if you want to buy the place. When you hit that bottom step, you come to a brace with your shoulders back, your stomach in, your feet at a 45-degree angle, and your hat straight. Jump! Oh! How old are you? Well, get 25 wrinkles under that chin. You got a girl? 2. 2 more wrinkles for them. Halt! Get that chest up in the air. Get it up. Way up. Get some wrinkles in that chin. More wrinkles. When I tell you to jump, I want you to jump this high. Jump! What did you come down for, mister? Wipe that smile off your face. Throw it on the ground. Step on it. Arms to the thrust. Boom! Double time. Charge! Halt! You're in it now, misters. For the next 6 weeks until you're upperclassmen, except for returning from mess, you move only at double time. West Point is not harder. Every minute of your waking time is accounted for and deliberately arranged so that you must hurry, hurry, hurry. You're allowed 7 hours sleep. You'll be lucky and a very bright student if you can manage 5. You're not privileged to eat or drink in any public place. You're not to step out of your room across the hall even to visit. Say, is this necessary? Well, maybe you're the kind of person who doesn't lend himself to this sort of discipline. You know it's necessary, but it's just not for you. You're too dignified. Or maybe you have your pride. Why, that's all right, mister. Just resign. Nothing will happen to you. You'll go back to your old rank. No one will hold it against you. Unless you hold it against yourself. But we want to find out now whether you, who have been picked to command, can learn to obey. The soldier who cannot stand up under strict regulations, discipline, and restrictions cannot discipline himself or others. This is where we must find out. Not here. Not when all these lives are involved.
And remember that Clark Gable would have undergone that kind of training himself. So now I'm going to hand it back to Audrey to speak about the next couple of films.
The next 2 films feature 2 parts of the same process, gathering and analyzing aerial photographic intelligence. You'll also notice they don't have very interesting titles. Most of these films do not have interesting titles because they were not made for the general public. They were made for internal use, so they tell us exactly what they are. The first film is a straightforward process-based training film that focuses on the steps in the process and the names of the units that participate. While parts of the film are really dry, there is a strong attempt to overlay a storyline that features reconnaissance pilot Captain Tim Grover seeing an old friend who serves in the Navy. So in the top right hand still, you can see Captain Tim Grover on the left, and then his friend is in the middle. That's Lieutenant Phil Bowen. He serves as the audience surrogate who listens as Captain Grover explains the process of photographic intelligence. Photographic intelligence for bombardment and aviation also features Alan Ladd as Captain Smith, a Sherlock Holmesian photo analyst, complete with a curved pipe and magnifying glass. And you see him on the bottom 2 stills with his pipe and magnifying glass. The Basil Rathbone series of Holmes films were being released at this time, so the illusions would have been immediately identifiable and entertaining for the intended audience of young trainees. When Ladd made this film, he was a rising star, with his popularity growing as a cache of productions he filmed before he joined the Army Air Forces hit American screens through 1943. Ladd was released from the military by the end of the year and returned to Hollywood. You might know him best if you don't know him from the films he made at this time with Veronica Lake. He also was in the Western classic Shane later on in the 1950s. The first clip, Smitty demonstrates his best Sherlock abilities as he reads a photograph and makes an important discovery.
Just a moment, Captain. Excuse me. I've noticed that one Hamburg area is being covered rather exhaustively.
in reconnaissance from your FIU. I'm curious to know why. What are you fellas after?
I can't understand all the flak in that area. What's it guarding?
I've wondered about that myself. Have you any ideas?
You notice this shadow here?
Might be the top of a fence or a long wall.
It's a roof, I think. Then there's that pond, sometimes empty, sometimes full. Just doesn't make sense.
Any clues from other intelligence sources?
No, I've checked all reports. Refugees, underground agents, travel lists, people who know the territory. There's been no commando raid on hamburgers yet, so there's no information from that source. Well, I guess I better get going.
Yeah, you'd better not keep the colonel waiting.
No. Major, look here. What do you make of this?
It looks like another shadow. Only this one's not in line with the first one. You don't suppose?
Of course. It's a roof, too.
You mean all one building, extending right to the pond?
Oh, what's the matter with me? That's no pond. That's a drain.
A drain for what?
For a water tunnel. Look. Here's the building. Here's the drain. And the building's shaped like this, long and narrow.
I can see the other edge of the roof now, under camouflage. What sort of a building do you think it is?
Testing basin.
For submarines?
That's right.
Captain Smith.
Just a moment.
I've been waiting for you in Navy.
I'm sorry, sir.
Sir, it looks as though Captain Smith had got onto one of the vital plants we've been after.
He has, eh? What's that?
A testing basin for submarines. Same principle as a wind tunnel for aircraft. Under that camouflage.
A submarine testing plant that far from the harbor?
Put there on purpose to escape detection.
We never even thought of looking so far inland. They manufacture important new parts here, and then test them on a submarine right in that basin.
Well, Captain, I guess I'll have to forgive you for keeping me waiting.
I should have figured it out long ago. I see it all now. As if there were no camouflage there at all.
Well, what happened to that plant?
Impatient cuts.
I've been waterlogged long enough. Come on, give out. Did they get it?
They blow it to hell and gone.
The second film is what the first motion picture unit would describe as inspirational, with the first being an instructional film. Rather than focus on the details of the process, Reconnaissance Pilot seeks to tell viewers how they should feel about their work. The film stars a young Bill Holden as Lieutenant Packaday Cummings, son of the Air Force general and World War I ace fighter pilot Wild Bill Cummings. Lieutenant Cummings is a superior pilot and is resentful when he's assigned to be a reconnaissance pilot rather than the fighter pilot position that he expected. Packy views recon as being too far from the action, particularly after his father is killed in action, and he, at that point, wants nothing more than to get revenge by downing Japanese planes. In our first clip, Lieutenant Cummings gets a taste of the excitement he craves when, while on a routine run, he's pursued by 5 Japanese Zero fighter planes.
You're now a full-fledged Photo Joe, and the name gripes you. You're fed up to the ears, but there's nothing you can do about it. You do your job as well as you can and keep your beefs to yourself. And you fly that F-5 on mission after mission. You fly the milk run to Kauai. You photograph jungles and beaches. But a tree's a tree and a strip of sand is a beach. And from 5 miles up, they all look alike. The war seems far away. You realize that men are fighting and dying in those pictures you get. But it seems as remote to you as if you read about it in the newspaper. More months pass. Today, you're headed back for the Kauai Airdrome. You've photographed it so many times you know it like the palm of your hand. But you've never seen an airplane there. As far as you're concerned, the Kauai run is still a waste of time. You're knocking it off at 350 miles an hour at 28,000 feet, and you're getting close to Korea. Then you see trouble. A nip patrol of 5 Zeros. You drop your belly tanks. They don't want you to photograph that airdrome. Why? Your oxygen's gone. Down you go. Without oxygen, you can only stay conscious for 30 seconds at that altitude. Your heart hammers and you fight to keep from blacking out. You're out of range. You've still got a job to do. Photograph that airdrome below you. You get set for your camera run and head in. They're putting up everything they've got. Your cameras are running. Then you look down. And there's nothing there. You can't figure it out. Get in those clouds.
The exciting scene concludes with Lieutenant Cummings evading the Japanese planes and forcing one to crash into the water, a feat that fills him with pride, but also gets him grounded. As we will see, Packy learns that his role as a recon pilot and his determination to complete his mission despite being under attack actually resulted in the downing, or 200 downed planes.
Well, it came out all right. The destruction of that Jap air fleet taught you your lesson. Because now you know that more and better aerial pictures will end this war just that much sooner.
First Lieutenant Packard A. Cummings, Distinguished Service Cross.
Congratulations, Lieutenant Cummings.
Thank you, sir.
You can say, and rightly so, that you were responsible for the destruction of 200 enemy aircraft. Your father would have been very proud of you.
Yes, sir.
You know now that our Photo Joe is a big man in this scrap. You've been on 52 missions. Now they're gonna send you home to instruct. Think of the yarns you can spill to your kids. Because, brother, you've been to war. She wants to know what it was like. You'll tell her someday. But right now, you don't feel like talking.
Wasn't so bad. Wasn't bad at all. Of course, we had to do without this. The film you've just seen is fiction, of course. That is, the part about my being a general's son and all that. But the adventures I went through are real. And these are the two men who actually did the things on which the film was based. This is Major Alex Gary, the most decorated recon pilot in our air forces. He's the one who's blamed for forcing the Jap Zero into the water. And this is Major Arthur L. Post, who, among other things, spent 100 days in the jungles of New Britain before finally returning to his base. That's the DSC. They're home on leave, and when that's over, they'll return to the South Pacific. Is there anything you'd like to say, gentlemen?
I'm not good at this. I get nervous.
Major Post? We'd rather be in the South Pacific, not as many automobiles or reckless drivers.
It's a lovely little add-on there. The year after Bill Holden filmed this short, he actually lost his own brother to the war. His brother was a Navy fighter pilot who was killed in action. Bill Holden went on to film a string of Hollywood classics in the 1950s, most notably Sunset Boulevard, Stalag 17, for which he won an Oscar, and Bridge on the River Kwai.
The First Motion Picture Unit also recognized the power of animation in making entertaining training films. Trigger Joe is a character introduced in the animated film Position Firing. His voice was provided by Mel Blanc, probably doing contract work as he was not a member of the First Motion Picture Unit. And the character was modeled after actor William Bendix, who is famous for his Brooklyn accent. Trigger Joe only appears briefly in position firing, which serves as a lesson in targeting deflection for gunners. From the stills on screen, you can see that much of the film is a geometry lesson, training the gunner to anticipate the position of an enemy fighter and accurately target it using deflection based on the radius of his ring sight. In the following clip, we see Trigger Joe put this training to work.
Remember these 3 points. Shoot only when he is attacking you and in range. Aim between the target and the tail of your bomber. Estimate the approach angle and apply the correct deflection. That's the story. Think you can do it?
Certainly. Give me a plane.
Ready? Here he comes. Well?
Goes kind of fast, don't it?
Only a few seconds for the whole attack.
How's for a chance to practice on a few, slower ones?
Okay, if you're sure you've got it straight.
Oh, I got it. I can talk it good.
Let's hear you. Here's a plane.
Well, first I figure is he an enemy plane? In this case, he is. Next, is he attacking? Not yet, but he looks suspicious. Yep, now he's turning in. I line him up and just wait for him to get in range. There he is, heading right for me. Hold it, hold it, hold it! I got a lot of figuring to do with this spot. Now, I'm going this way. He's coming this way. It's about 90 degrees. It's 3 of these rad things. On a line to my tail, and he's in range. I guess I can shoot. Okay, let him come. Hold it! That's 2 seconds. Yeah, now he's back here. Looks like about a rad and a half. Maybe a little more. There. Start him again. How'd I do?
Didn't miss a thing. How about taking one full speed?
Okay, why not? First I gotta identify him. He's enemy, all right. Looks like the same guy. Maybe I'll get him this time. Now he's coming in. Gotta line him up, check the range, estimate approach angle, towards my tail, 90 degrees again, 3 rads over here, down here, start shooting. I'm going 2 seconds range, check about a rad and a half, so I shoot again, keep the rhythm.
Look, Trigger, look at the plane.
It works. Well, I'll be a sad sack of rads.
Trigger Joe was very popular and effective. One film columnist celebrated the 12-minute motion picture that could replace 14 days of classroom training. And the First Motion Picture Unit produced a series of films starring the character. The production team included John Hubley, Bill Hertz, and Willis Pyle, all later with UPA, the home of Mr. Magoo, and Frank Thomas of Disney. Another series produced by the First Motion Picture Unit was the Land and Live films, which taught airmen how to survive after crashing in an extreme environment. In addition to Land and Live in the Jungle, the First Motion Picture Unit made films about surviving in the desert and the Arctic. The films aimed to show that with preparation and ingenuity, flight crews could survive in those environments until rescue.
The jungle looked so soft and easy from a B-25 upstairs. But now, downstairs, the jungle looks very different. And there's a 5-man crew in it, somewhere. This is Sergeant Mel Ford, the gunner. Just a kid who used to work in a flour mill in Spokane, Washington, and never spent a day in the woods in his life. Since all of them but the pilot bailed out together, there's a good chance of being heard if he yells.
Hello there! Hello! Hello!
No answer. Not at first. But a little later, he hears somebody else yelling.
Hey, Bill!
And then he sees him. The navigator, Lieutenant Pat McVeigh. A steady, dependable guy who'd been a high school football coach before the war. A good man to have around in an emergency.
Hello there, sir.
Hi. Here.
How are you? All right?
Okay, fine. Sergeant Ford is worried about leaving his chute in the treetop, but that's okay. Since McVeigh has his chute, Ford's will be a good marker for any searching plane to spot. 2 more crew members. 4 out of 5 accounted for. They're pretty lucky to have landed close by. If they hadn't, it would have taken a lot longer to get together.
Land and Live in the Jungle stars Oscar-winning actor Van Heflin, who later co-starred in Shane with Ellen Ladd, as an ill-prepared pilot named Harrison who forgets his training at almost every turn. His situation is contrasted throughout the film with that of his crew, who are following procedure and are much better off as a result.
They're looking ahead, playing it smart. And while they're eating, 10 miles away, Harrison is standing and drooling. He drools for minutes before the light dawns. Anything a monkey will eat is good for a man. A simple jungle rule it took him 2 days to get. He's so busy stuffing himself, he doesn't see trouble coming. Storm clouds. The crew sees them, though, as they're picking their way down the shallow stream, one of the fastest and easiest ways to travel in the jungle, if you can't find a trail. They don't waste any time getting to high ground. In the tropics, rain comes swiftly and heavily, and streams may flood in a flash. If it looks like rain, no time should be lost in providing shelter. You can build a lean-to in a hurry. It should be set up with the wind at the rear, and the slanting poles should be fixed against a firm base. A heavy log will do. For a floor, branches covered with sleeping bags. You can cover your lean-to with a parachute, but since it isn't completely waterproof, you should cover the parachute with leaves. Banana leaves are best if you can find them. Start at the bottom and work up, the way a house is shingled, so the rain will run off easily. Harrison is caught short again, with no time to rig up adequate protection. He could cover his shelter with the large leaves around him, but that might be using his head. A fire would be a big help. You'd think he'd know enough to strip the wet bark from his wood, or to whittle some dry shavings. Naturally, his fire is a great success. And so he sits and shivers and soaks. Although with a little common sense, he too could have had a fire under cover. And he too could have been warm and dry.
After the crew has located the plane, with the help of a local village, they ultimately rescue Harrison, who by that point has contracted malaria.
And then when Harrison is able to sit up, the village throws a party for him. In a few days, Harrison would be well enough to travel, and they'd head for the coast where they'd be picked up.
Well, that's it. That's the works. Now, you've seen the jungle both ways. It can be tough, or it can be easy. Tough if you don't know what you're doing and you haven't got your equipment. And a lot easier if you follow the book. Now, you can live in the jungle, even alone, and like it. But you've got to be prepared for it, and you can't be afraid. There's only one answer to fear: knowledge. So if you do land in the jungle, then land and live.
And there at the end, Van Heflin referenced doing things by the book, and they actually did have a little book that showed how to survive in the desert, the jungle, and the Arctic. Van Heflin also narrated Land and Live in the Desert, and he served as a combat cameraman during the war. Wings for This Man is a first motion picture unit film about the Tuskegee Airmen. Like the Army film, The Negro Soldier, Wings for This Man frames African American troops as a powerful weapon against the forces of the Nazis and the Japanese. The Negro Soldier was also shown to white soldiers to broaden the acceptance of African Americans in combat roles, and it's likely that Wings for This Man was used in a similar way. The film, narrated by Ronald Reagan, details the training regimen at Tuskegee University and Airfield that prepared the men to deploy as pilots in segregated units of the Army Air Forces. At several points in the film, it acknowledges the racism that was faced by the airmen, noting that in order for the Tuskegee training program to even exist, misunderstanding, distrust, and prejudice had to be cleared away.
Here above the warm, familiar hills of Alabama, these Americans are learning to fly in those tight combat formations they'll use someday to hunt down the German and Jap above his own cities. In addition to fighter groups, a year ago this field began to train men for medium bombers. And that too was a pioneer step. But one thing it proved: you can't judge a man here by the color of his eyes or the shape of his nose. On the flight strip, you judge a man by the way he flies. Here's the answer to Adolf and Hirohito. Here's the answer to the propaganda of the Japs and Nazis. Here's the answer: wings for this man. Here's the answer: wings for these Americans. Squadron after squadron out of Tuskegee, flying P-40s first, tough little planes, then striking with Thunderbolts, P-47s, then riding the Mustangs, P-51s. No, it was never easy for these men. They were pioneers, and no pioneer has it easy. They fought lies, they fought heartbreak, and they won. Now they fight the enemy on his own soil.
And that was some of the combat footage that would have been captured by units trained by the first motion picture unit. The combat accomplishments of the Tuskegee Airmen helped pave the way for the integration of the U.S. Armed Forces by order of President Truman in 1948. In this presentation, you've seen only a small slice of the first motion picture unit films held at the National Archives, and we're happy to bring it to you in honor of the Air Force's 70th anniversary as an independent branch of the U.S. military. I think the exact date on that was September 16th. Almost all the films we showed today are on YouTube in their entirety, with Wings Up to be added soon, and we hope to be adding more as they're digitized. You can also visit the Motion Picture and Recorded Sound Research Room at our facility in College Park to view the films. If we have a reference copy, you can view it that day. If there's not yet a reference copy existing, it will be scanned by the lab and then made available as a digital file in the research room. If you're interested in reading more about the first motion picture unit, here are some articles we relied on in our research. Doug Cunningham is working on a book about the unit, and Mark Betancourt's article is very engaging and informative, and it's available online currently. There's also a documentary called Hollywood Commandos that was made in 1997 that's a really good overview of the unit. Our presentation is going to be available online, so you don't need to write down the link right now. You can come and find it and get all this information off of there. Here are the addresses for the National Archives Unwritten Record blog and our YouTube channel, where you can find more information about the films, both military and civilian, that are held at the National Archives. And now I think we have some time for questions.
Thank you so much. Come come up here since I'm mobile. That was so informative and interesting. I'd invite anybody who's in our audience. Let me come up here so I can get on camera. Anybody who is with us in the theater, if you have any questions for our presenters, think about it. We ask that you use the microphone, or maybe we can repeat the question. So in the meanwhile, I do have a question that came from our online audience, and it kind of captured my imagination. He asked, did the first motion picture unit have a unit, emblem, or patch?
Actually, they did. It is viewable on the Wikipedia page for the first motion picture unit. It's actually a little cartoon or a little thing that looks like it was done by a Disney animator, because it looks kind of like Dopey from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And he's piloting a little fighter plane. I don't know if that was actually a patch, but it was an insignia that was adopted. And they also had a really great motto. It was, "We kill 'em with film."
Thank you. I'm impressed you had an answer for that right away. Very good. Let me see if we have any more from our online audience. Anybody here would like to ask a question? Go ahead if you don't mind repeating.
I just wondered if there was any classified information that is still classified.
So the question was, were there any films, I guess, where it would still be classified? My understanding, I'm not an expert in classification of information, but my understanding is that almost anything from World War II at this point has been declassified. There would still be exceptions made for anything related to nuclear technology. At the time, there were a lot of things that were classified because one of the things that they did was they had this full-scale model. There's a really great film that shows how this was all done, and that film was classified. They had a full-scale model of Japan that they then would make a film to prepare the pilots to go do their bombing runs. So they would have a little camera that would run over it to show them exactly where they needed to go. That's all declassified now.
Okay, the question was whether the first motion picture unit would have sent people out to Britain to capture films before America got into the war. The first motion picture unit itself wouldn't have done that because it hadn't been formed yet, but many of the people who ultimately ended up in it, they may have worked as newsreel photographers or in other capacities where they would have been in Europe capturing that footage as news film. So it's very likely that there was some crossover there.
If you're interested in military films about the Battle of Britain, there is part of the Why We Fight series. This is the Signal Corps, but part of the Why We Fight series produced by Frank Capra for the U.S. Army Signal Corps is the Battle of Britain. And that is also, the entire Why We Fight series is available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to view them. I can't speak to that for sure, but that was my impression too, is that they were sort of informational and motivational, and that they were widely viewed.
Okay, we just got a rather broad question. Let's see how you can do. He says off topic, but how much combat footage is available from World War II, and is it indexed by date, location, or unit?
So there's a whole series that would be 111 ADC. That's the first one I can think of. That would be Signal Corps, though. RG 111 is Signal Corps. What else? I'm not the right person to ask for this for sure, but 111 ADC, they're all described. You can look for all of those descriptions are available in our catalog, and it's combat footage, but it's also just everything that they were filming. It's the raw footage for everything that the Signal Corps was filming.
Yeah, in each branch of the military, their films would have ended up in a different record group. So I think the Marine Corps is in record group 428. So,
That's the,
or, yeah, but 428 is Navy, right?
Yes, 26 is the, no,
Okay.
that's Coast Guard. Sorry.
We work with all these and get them confused, but each branch of the military would have been collecting the films, and it would have ended up at the National Archives under a different record group. So there's a lot of different avenues you can go down to find the combat footage.
And there's a lot. That is really far outside the scope of, I'm sorry, that was a question about the treatment of POWs in the United States versus POWs in Japan or Germany. As airmen. Oh, as airmen. If, it's a really good question that I do not know the answer to. I'm sorry. It's a good question. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I can, maybe someone in the YouTube comments could answer that. Well, we certainly, so the first motion picture unit, the way that it was, didn't exist after the war because Hal Roach came back. So his studios, he started making films again. All of the men that worked there went back to their regular jobs, but the Air Force did continue to make films. It just wasn't in that exact place or, in that particular formulation. But we work on Air Force films all the time. They continued, and they took very good care of their films too. So all of the films are in good condition in general that we have to work on. Do you have anything to add to that? Did I repeat the question? You asked if the first motion picture unit disbanded at the end of the war. That was the question.
I know that they were also known as the 18th Army Air Force's base unit, but as far as I can tell, I didn't find references to that unit after the war either.
So obviously, since World War II was all the way in Europe, I know that film in Germany and Great Britain and everything kind of ceased for the most part during World War II. But was there still a similar kind of unit, especially for, say, Great Britain, was then to train their troops or raise morale or anything like that?
So the question, I actually don't know a lot about this, but the question was whether or not Britain and the other allied countries had their own film units. And the answer would be yes. We have, what's the one we did a full restoration on for D-Day, 70th anniversary of D-Day?
The True Glory?
True Glory, yeah, that was True Glory. You can find on our YouTube channel. We did a full digital restoration. That was a combination joint effort of the U.S. and its allies. So it wasn't footage just that we shot. And also, kind of famously, the footage from D-Day, we lost ours. So most of the footage from D-Day is actually not footage that we shot. It's that we got copies from our allies. So they did have their own. It was really important to both document and, as you said, for training purposes and morale purposes.
Okay. Is there any, sorry.
sorry.
What do you think a technology that was developed maybe during World War II for photography do you think was most important, if there was one?
I'm not sure what the most important would be, the question. Yeah, they developed a lot of gun cameras that would fire, or they would shoot in sync with the guns on the airplanes. That's the only piece of technology that I can remember reading about in my research. But the first motion picture unit really they innovated with how to use the techniques of movie making in order to meet the needs of a military organization in a very entertaining and effective way. And that's kind of the biggest innovation of the first motion picture unit.
Great, thank you so much. Wow, what great questions that everybody had. So the purpose of the Know Your Records program is to teach you about the records we have here hold at the National Archives and how to use them for research. I think that this presentation, you certainly fulfilled that goal. Thank you. So if we did not get to your question, they provided their email addresses. If you can't remember their whole one, you can also send it to our research staff at inquire@nara.gov. And so please know that this video recording, their presentation slides are available online on the YouTube channel, or you can go to Know Your Records. And on behalf of the National Archives and our presenters, I want to thank you for joining us today.